provide a taxonomy of deontic relationship, include the bilateral contract, unilateral contract, single obligation, and so forth. You can see it in chapter 5 of the dissertation. There is a long argument in order to come up with this taxonomy. And then I provide the taxonomies of deontic chain. What kind of deontic chain may happen in a deontic process? So you may imagine there are two aspects of the deontic process. The first is about the static aspect or the structure aspect of the process. And the second is about the dynamic aspect, the movement or the change of the deontic relation. So then I will identify for each kind of deontic chain, I identify the scope of effect, depend on the deontic relationship. For instance, a very simple activity, when the seller delivers goods to the carrier, at the same time, he fulfills his obligation to the buyer. And at the same time, he gets a right to collect payment from the bank or from any agent that is authorized by the seller. So you see a single activity here covers many different deontic effects. One effect is to discharge the obligation that he has with the seller. Another is to entitle him a right to collect payment. So for any kinds of deontic chain, I identify the scope of effect defined by the deontic relationship that I identified before. And then I identify the potential fraud for each of the parties involved in the process. And then identify control requirement in order to limit this potential fraud. And finally, I arrange the certain potential fraud and certain control requirement based on the nature of the transaction into control principle. Even though I thought that the process is short like that, it's briefly explained like that, but this whole chapter 5, it's about 60 pages, just to explain the process of analyzing the deontic process to come up with the set of 10 control principles. And the result of this is the 10 control principles that cover the entire life cycle of a transaction. Start from secure the creation of the transaction, transfer of the transaction, modification of the transaction somehow, and discharge of the transaction. And the core for chain may be by performative action, like the speech act, promise, claim, declaration, all kinds of speech activity that change the deontic relation. I also identify the chain on the deontic relation by physical action, like delivery goods, making payment, and so forth. I also identify control principle for the occurrence of the natural event, like in certain event that trigger an insurance obligation and so forth. So the result of that is a set of 10 control principles, and this is an example of the control principle. The list of the detailed control principles are in the dissertation, and I don't want to build out more detail on that. But the key thing, this set of control principles try to explicate the relationship between the deontic reality and documentary reality. This is, the principle represent an initial formal theory on the relationship between deontic reality and documentary reality. In other words, it's trying to explain why a document is needed, why an activity in a documentary procedure is needed. And if we map this kind of thing to the organizational or managerial theory, and you will see, in management, there are two essential mechanisms to govern interorganizational transactions. These mechanisms are contract and procedure. And this, the set of principles also have to explain, if you replace here by the contract mechanism, and if you replace here by the procedural mechanism, then map to management theory, then the set of principles will have to explicate the relationship between the two essential mechanisms that govern interorganizational transaction, which is contract and procedure. Then, for each of the control principles, I will formalize in one or more control rules, and the result of that is 30 control rules. And in chapter 6, you will see again a chapter with dense notation. That is a chapter about the formal representation of control rules. In general, The control rule is in the symbol form of P implied Q, where P is the fraud indicator and Q is the control requirement. The fraud indicator here is represented as a formula of temporal logic. More specifically, it is in the form of a branching time temporal logic called the computation tree logic, the CTL. And the control requirement here is a control obligation, as I explained before, including the control activity, the agent that performs the activity, and the temporal position in the procedure, before certain activity or after certain activity or at the same time and so on. Here, for instance, it's before doing something. And this is one of the implementation. This is the formal representation. This is the implementation in Prolog. You see here is very nice. The nice thing here is that nearly there are no major change in the formal representation and the workable implementation.
Executable.
The executable. So the main function, one of the principal function of the formalization is whether it's implementable or executable. We can provide a beautiful mathematical method. However, it doesn't work in computing system. It's useless. So the thing here is to try to balance between the theoretical rigor of the implementation, this means in temporal logic, Deontic logic, and so forth, and the practicabilities or implementabilities of the formalism. You see here, the difference here is maybe slightly different, mainly due to the set of notation allowed by the formalism and the set of notation allowed by Prolog in specific.
I have a quick question here.
Yeah.
And so, what is that expression? Is that Q or the whole
Yeah,
thing?
the Q is here. You can consider the Q is here. Well, before this one is the P.
So
So
that-
the P. Before this one is P, and from here this is an obligation. This is Q.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, and then all those R for what are those?
This is the
symbols?
role. This is the role. For instance, if you look at the control rule here, you may see the way to read the